What is up, everybody? DanDanTheFireman here. We're going to be talking about this accident that involved Walterrific. It's going to be a solo accident, and this is something that I covered in a prior live stream back in May, but now I get to spend a little bit more time, annotate a little bit more, and explain a few more things. This is going to be a very obvious accident, how it happened. We're going to talk about some of that stuff, but I really want to focus on the medical side of this. So we're going to go over a lot of the medical things that the paramedics talking about, how Walterrific is talking, how and whys and all these different things. You guys liked that max risk video I did, so I'm going to be doing something very similar to that video, but with Walterrific. And thank you once again, Walterrific, for posting this online so we can all learn from it. But let's go ahead and jump into the accident portion, and I'm going to let you guys see it, hear it, and then I'm just going to pause and annotate throughout all of this. So that was what caused the accident. It's pretty obvious that we weren't paying attention to the road ahead of us. We were changing the song. He talks about that in this video extensively, and he's very humble about that. So I'm really happy that he's that type of person that wants others to learn, and he's not going to shy away from showing some of the negative stuff because everyone on social media posts just positive stuff. So this is really good. So if we take a look at this part right here, we obviously have a change of direction when it comes to the road. So it's going to be turning left. But when we're so focused on changing like our phone or looking at our speedo and all these different things, we're just going to continue going straight. So that's going to be why he crashed into the curb. Pretty self-obvious, but let's go ahead and pick up some of the stuff that wasn't so obvious that let's go ahead and think about a little bit more. So about right here, this is what I want to talk about, is that he had to take his glove off in order to change the song. Now, taking the glove off, you remove some protection just in case something does happen. But the reason why he probably took the glove off is because he can't, it's a touch screen, so it's not going to work with his gloves. Now, they have gloves nowadays that have on the thumb and then on the index finger, it's going to have like these little things so that it's going to be able to use a touch screen. So if that's something that you do, make sure you get some gloves that does that, so that way you don't have to take off your gloves. So like I said, he took off his gloves, going to remove protection, so that now when we go for a crash, we don't have that protection, that impact protection specifically for when we put our hands down. So he's going to put his hands down, and it's not going to absorb the impact into the glove. It's going to be transmitted all the way through his body into his collarbone, which at the end of the day is broken now.
Oh, that's what happened. I was using the phone. Idiot.
So that whole span of a couple seconds of like just laying there like, what the hell happened? And then he realized, oh, this is what happened. Now, I'm not saying he has a TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury, but you're going to see a little bit later that it quite possibly could have been. So he is going to say later on that he answered a question like, do you remember everything? He's like, well, there's a moment in time I don't, or it was very much like that. We'll listen to it later. But this right here is going to be that thing. It's like, why am I on the ground? Oh, yeah. So that right there is your brain got jostled enough to cause some type of short circuit, but then it's healthy enough to come right back. In a very massive traumatic brain injury, like you hit your head hard and you are unconscious for a little bit, it's going to take you a lot longer to come back. So this is going to be a very minor thing. When it comes to a TBI, it's probably gonna be like on the smaller end of the scale, but it's still a traumatic brain injury because your brain, coup contra coup, it's gonna be slashing back and forth between your skull. That's why he lost a little bit of memory for even just 5 to 10 seconds.
Ironically, I said, what if something bad happens on the way today? And I was like, nah. Pardon me. 911 now.
So we got our first bystander on scene, and he's going to be calling 911. And this is something that is very important if you ever are a bystander, or if you're the one in the crash and you're coherent enough to call 911. Make sure you call 911 or 999 or whoever, the emergency services. You want to get them on the phone. You want them to get rolling. So the whole chain of care is literally you have to call 911 to start the whole process. And if you don't start the process, nobody will come. There's going to be no help, no nothing. It's pretty obvious, but the whole chain of care involves this, and I'm going to talk about that. You have to call 911, and then dispatch will receive that 911 call. It's going to, at that point, they're going to be asking questions, where are you at, what happened, how many people. That's basically going to be 3 questions here. And I know there's a few dispatchers in the chat or in the comments that are going to be able to chime in a little bit on that. So please do so. Use your expertise to help everybody else out. So you have to call 911. They're going to get the dispatchers. Now the dispatchers going to be like, okay, hold on the line. I'm going to be calling, police and fire. If they say that or not, they're going to at least tell you to hold on to the line. At that point, they're going to be dispatching police, fire, EMS, whoever they need to dispatch for that call. So now you have the ball rolling and starting to go to where firefighters and paramedics and EMTs can show up on scene. But if you never call 911, that's not going to happen. So once they dispatch those people, they're going to get back on the line and they're going to ask more information. They're going to ask you, okay, what's his approximate age? Is he bleeding anywhere? Is he breathing? Is this happening? Is this happening? Then from there, they're gonna be typing down in their notes, and it's gonna be transmitted to the fire, police, EMS, to their computers, which typically the captain has, or in a cop car, it's facing the driver so he can actually see it, and they're gonna be updated over the radio too. It's going to be more information that's going to give us a really good visual of what's happening, so then we can start pre-planning some of our medical care or who we have to call. We might have to call for air flight or some type of helicopter if it's out in the middle of nowhere, all based on mechanism of injury. And I talk about mechanism of injury a lot in my videos, but it's very important for EMS and for others to have an understanding of what possibly could be happening. So that's where that starts. Okay, and then once EMS shows up, okay, it's going to take them quite a while. You're going to watch in this video. It's going to take them quite a while. When they show up, you have every right as a patient to refuse service. Now, this is one thing that people say, don't call 911, don't call 911. I don't want anybody here. I don't want to bill. I don't want to bill. You can refuse service. It's kidnapping if police, fire, or anybody just grabs you and takes you. Police, they have their own laws when it comes to arresting or detain patients or anything like that. They have to get a judge order and all these different things, really depending on policies. But same thing with EMS. Like, we literally can't put you in the back of the ambulance. That is kidnapping. We'll lose our certifications. We'll go to jail. All these different things. So you're going to see later on that she's going to recommend that people go to the hospital, or Walterrific go to the hospital, because we can't say you're going. So you can always refuse service, and then you won't have to pay for that. So that's really good information. If you feel like you can have a buddy take you to the hospital, then do that. But either way, you should get some definitive care. This is all pre-hospital care. Definitive care is at a hospital or a doctor.
For the most part, I'm okay. I just hurt my arm. Sure, you I hurt my arm. Were you walking over there? Oh, you were driving. My arm. What's your...
So he's talking about his arm a lot, and we know later on that it was a broken collarbone. So what's happening here is that he's having radiated pain. So just like, the sun's radiation pretty much heats us up and everything, it's going through a vacuum. Radiated pain, you have an initial pain point, and then with our bodies, how the nerves and how everything is situated. Women are different than men. People with diabetes are different with no diabetes. Either way, you're going to have some type of radiated pain. So it's going to travel. The pain itself is going to travel to the arm, and now you're going to have pain in your arm. But the original point of impact and basically deformity is going to be in the collarbone, but it's going to transmit down to your arm. So if you start feeling that type of stuff, just imagine that there could quite possibly be a source of it, and it could be completely different. But as Walterrific is sitting here, I don't think he's too concerned about that, but he's going to find out later that he has no structural stability because the bone is broken.
Name, guy. Lift my head so I can look at you. You got your... Here. Okay. What's your name, man?
How you doing?
I'm Walter. So stupid.
No, I tried.
That whole short, choppy breaths, that is pain induced. You'd be surprised what pain can do to your body biologically, anatomically, whatever words you want to use, but it has a massive effect on your body. Pain can increase your blood pressure or even drop your blood pressure. It's going to make you breathe faster. It's going to make you do this or short, choppy breath, so you have to breathe faster. And that can really mess up a few things if you have an underlying medical condition. So a simple collarbone break and this much pain, and if you have, let's say, diabetes or you have already high blood pressure, I mean, we're starting to walk into stroke territory when your blood pressure gets 200 over 100 something, and that could easily happen with a painful situation. So if you're elderly or you have any type of medical condition, it's very important not to get injured. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory on that one, but you need to understand that it could cause a medical issue. A trauma and medical are different. Trauma could cause a medical issue, or a medical issue could cause a trauma. So let's say he's riding on his bike and he is diabetic and he didn't eat anything and he took too much insulin without eating. His blood sugar drops. Now he's going to go into diabetic coma while he's riding. And that's not good, because then obviously you crash. Now you have trauma to your body, but what caused it was a medical issue. So it's very important that we need to start thinking in that terms, especially if you are somebody that has some medical issues.
If you can go to my apartment to get some Advil, that'd be awesome.
Something better than that.
Sorry for whining.
You look like your boots up on your...
No, my legs are fine. It's just my right shoulder.
So when he's saying my legs are fine, it's just my right shoulder. Right now, the pain in his shoulder is pretty much masking the rest of his body. I don't know. I don't have the after the crash type stuff. It's a nice little segue here. We're going to talk about after the crash. What I would like to do is talk to Walterrific about this new podcast that I have coming on, where I talk to people about what happens after the crash. I'd like to talk to him about the physical costs, like his body and his bike, how damaged it was, and then the financial costs, how much all this stuff costs to repair and fix to get back on the road or whatever it is. And then the mental costs, did he ever get back on the road? It's obvious he did, because he's still making videos. But I would like to know that. Also the family, friends, and for him, his viewers, their reactions to what's happening. It'd be really interesting to get an idea of what happened after the crash. That way other people can understand a little bit more. Plus we can get more information, and maybe my assumptions are wrong here, and I would love to be corrected by having a conversation. So he's talking about his legs are fine in his collarbone. His arm is what's hurting. That could mask any type of pain. So that's a distracting injury. And for all we know, he could be having like a slow bleed in his liver, or he could have been lacerated, all these different things in his abdomen. His legs could be injured, but they don't hurt as much as his collarbone. So it's not registering with him mentally in that aspect. So I'd really interested into talking with you. So let's see if we can get something going. 5 to 20 minute conversation. I think that's all it'll take.
Okay. Okay, hold
on. Hey, buddy. What's up, Shannon?
Huh?
I said, what's up, Shannon? What's your name? Richard. Nice to meet you. Thanks for stopping. This is so lame.
Somebody want to call?
Ghostbusters. I guess my humor lobe is still intact. I know when they move my arm, it's going to hurt. Tell me a joke. Something. Tell me that the election didn't happen. Doesn't hurt as much if I don't move.
So it doesn't hurt if we don't move. That right there is definitely going to be an injury, because they're going to have to move him. And then the fact that he's like, it doesn't hurt when it's not moving. So when he said that it doesn't hurt that bad when it's not moving, that's going to tell me quite a bit. So whenever I show on scene, it's like, if you move, it does it hurt? And if they're like, yeah, it does. Okay, well, stop doing that. We're going to go ahead and assist you. But that's going to tell me that there is something anatomically wrong. So I talked about bones being basically like the scaffolding or the load-bearing walls of your house. And then everything else inside your house, all the other stuff is like your muscles, tendons, ligaments, all that other stuff. So if you lose a load-bearing wall or you break a bone, you're going to have structural instability. So for him, he has a broken collarbone, which is going to make it so that his whole right arm is going to be painful. He can still kind of move it, but it's going to be super painful. And then he's not going to be able to lift his shoulder up and down and around because the structural stability is gone. That's why you need to have intact bones. It's crazy, huh? So we also have a passage of time. We notice we have somebody new here. Also realize on top of this is that they've called 911 a while ago. It takes a long time for EMS or police to show up. Typically, police show up a little bit sooner because they're already out patrolling. But like I said, with the dispatcher, they have to dispatch the firefighters or EMTs. And typically, depends on the policies, they have to get on the ambulance or on the fire truck within a minute or a minute and a half, 2 minutes, depends, like I said, on the policies. And then from there, they got to travel to get to you. And that could range for anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes. So it does take quite a bit. So realize that when you're laying there or you have a friend that's laying there, it's like, what do we do? What do we do? And the best way to have an understanding of what to do, how to make sure that the person stays alive between calling 911 or between the accident and when EMS shows up is to take an accident scene management class. Now, there's an online class that's going to give you a ton of information. It's not as good as being in person, which is like everything, you know, watching my videos versus going to the MSF. But you can get that class. It's only $30, I believe. But then you get $5 off with code DDFM. So make sure you guys check that out and get some information so you know what to do just in case something happens.
I mean, not to have you move or breathe or.
Oh, I can't breathe. Well, good luck if I'm still alive.
Anywhere else, just right shoulder?
Yeah, it's just my right shoulder.
Okay, just hang tight, don't move.
So that was, let's go ahead and scroll back just a little bit. That was an animal control officer. And typically when you see somebody with some type of authority like that, especially if it's in a government agency, they really only have the very basic first aid. They might know how to put Band-Aids on people, which is a typical thing. Everybody should know how to do that. But then they might know how to use like an AED, which is a defibrillator for medical stuff. But they don't have a lot of the first responder care, like wound management or CPR, a lot of that stuff. So you can't really utilize them too much, but what can you utilize? And that's one of the things you learn in accident scene management is that these are all bystanders basically, but how can we use them? This guy with the animal control has a radio. He has direct contact with dispatch. He can relay information if he absolutely has to. And if he has a vehicle with lights and everything, he can block traffic if he has to. So utilize what you can when it comes to bystanders.
Anywhere else, just right shoulder?
Yeah, it's just my right shoulder.
Okay, just hang tight, don't move. You do look like you have a few parts to buy for your bike, but not too bad.
Man, all I really care about is that it's drivable. I'm Jason Bourne. Ow.
Good. I'm gonna head out.
Oh, you got stuff to do? That's fine, dude. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, appreciate it.
So we have our first basically first responder showing up. So this is a police officer, and the reason why he has that vest is because it's a traffic issue. He doesn't want to get hit. So being hit by a vehicle that's not paying attention is very common with police and fire, so they try their absolute best when it comes to being visible. But it doesn't always help all the time, and things still can happen. So that's why having traffic control is very important. Even if police and fire are not on scene yet and you're just here taking care of your buddy, you want to have somebody directing traffic, and you learn all that within the accident scene management class. But here he's going to be asking some questions, so let's go ahead and listen.
Do you feel your extremities?
Yes, sir, I can feel everything.
Well, fire department's here, so I'm going to let them look at you, all right?
Cool.
Do you have your driver's license and stuff inside your motorcycle?
It's in my left pocket.
Okay, I'll let them worry about getting that out here in a little bit, all right?
So he's asking about extremities. He's trying to do his own assessment, but that's not his expertise. His expertise is obviously policing. So that was a good attempt at an assessment. There could have been a lot more, but it looks like there's a few jump cuts, so I can't tell. And then he asks about your license and registration. So he's asking in terms of, so he can get information for his side and his paperwork. And he's also asking because fire is going to need to have your license, because it's a lot easier to take down your information like your name, date of birth, where you live, all that stuff, than it is to interrupt the paramedic trying to do an assessment and be like, hey, 1 second, what's your name? How do you spell that? And then now you're wasting time with the patient when you could just be done with a license. So it's actually very important to have that on you at all times for many reasons, but that's definitely one of them.
Thank you, Dave.
There they are.
What's going on?
Saw, dude.
How you feeling?
It's just my right shoulder.
Right shoulder? Okay.
So right there, when he asks that question, he's looking around. He's getting an idea, like everyone's kind of looking at each other. Okay, we have an understanding of what's going on. And he's probably making an assumption and something based on evidence, obviously. It's an educated guess that this is going to be more of a basic life support. There's advanced life support and basic life support. And basic life support is a lot of what EMTs can do. So we don't really have to push medications. We don't have to get IVs. We don't have to do a lot of crazy stuff. With advanced life support, I mean, you got your monitor out. So you're monitoring the heart rate. You got a 12 lead on, possibly shocking somebody if it's a bad issue, pushing specific drugs for specific ailments, all these different things that are at a higher scope of practice. And I talk about riding within your limits. That's where you want to go. You want to stay within that limit. So with scope of practice with an EMT, you only can operate in this area, just like riding within your limits. And then paramedics have a wider range. So the advanced life support stuff is more so in the wider range, advanced stuff. And then the basic life support stuff is the EMT. A lot of the stuff that happens that takes care of people really is in the BLS area. And then the advanced stuff does save lives, but that's more of like, oh crap, there's some crazy stuff happening. And I kind of relate that when it comes to learning how to ride a motorcycle, is that we all need to understand the basics. And then if you really want to, after you've done plenty of time and you've mastered a lot of these basics, let's move on to some of the advanced skills and techniques. So my suggestions for you when it comes to motorcycle stuff, stick with the basics and work really hard to master those first.
Do you have any neck or back pain?
I wouldn't know unless I tried moving my head. I haven't really tried.
So asking about head, neck, or back pain is very important because that's obviously your spine, and then your brain is the nervous system and everything. So if he has head pain, it's going to really indicate that he possibly has a traumatic brain injury. Right now, they haven't asked the questions about, do you remember all that stuff? They will ask that later. But he's just trying to get an idea of pain itself. And if you have back pain, you could easily injure your back in an accident like this based off of the mechanism of injury. And if you have back pain, then it's really important to make sure that we are protecting the back by putting him on a backboard, a lot like what you did on the MrRuski video where they flew him out, but they put him on a backboard first, and it's a splint for your spine. Just like if you break your arm, you get a splint for your arm. But if you break something in your spine, you have to have a splint for your spine. It just so happens it's your whole body that needs to be splinted. So that's where he's going with that. That's the type of questioning that I would ask, and that's a BLS question.
Hurt up here? Or
Yeah.
the neck?
Those are back to shoulder.
You gotta feel along your neck to make sure.
I don't think you gentlemen told me your names, by the way.
I'm Justin. Justin, I'm Jake.
I mean, I got so many names today.
On a 1 to 10 scale, how bad's that pain in the right shoulder?
At the moment, it's just probably a nice 4 or 5.
The whole questioning of what's your pain, from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst pain, 1 being pain that you can handle because you kind of stubbed your toe, it's not a big deal, and you forgot about it 10 seconds later. That's basically what that is. So that is a very subjective with an objective kind of questioning. So you're going to get a subjective answer. You're going to get somebody saying, well, this is okay. It's an 8 out of 10, but it's fine. So that's going to be a person that can handle a lot of pain, or they're just very bad at judging their pain. You're going to ask the same question with the same injuries, or a different person, and they're going to say it's 2 out of 10. So you're going to get 2 different answers for the same thing for that, but it's going to give you an idea of where this person is really sitting at. Typically, like with him, let's use his example, is 4 out of 10. If you move it, touch it, do all this stuff, it can easily spike to 7, 8 to 10 out of 10. So that's why they want to know that. They want to know what it is right now when you're laying down, and then they're going to probably ask you again after moving you, what is it now? And if it's spiked or if it stays there now, either they did something wrong by moving it, or that's just the way it is because it's typical. You move something that hurts, it's going to hurt. So then they can get an idea of if they need to give medications. That's that whole point.
Oh, thank you for being my friend today. Have a good day.
So about a 4 or 5.
5.
Okay. Well, when we bump into it or move your arm at all, it jumps up there pretty hard.
Yeah. Are you trying to get my helmet off? If you pull the red tab and either lanyard, they just come right apart. You don't have to fish around. Just pull either side. There you go. All right. So, yeah, it's going to come off with some difficulty because of the earmuffs, but I need to lift my head for you to get it off.
Okay.
So, let's see how that goes.
So with the helmet being removed, you really want to wait for EMS to show up and do it themselves. That way, it's not necessarily, well, now the liability's off you. That's one thing, but they're also trained to do that, and they have multiple hands, and they've done it many times before. As a bystander, you're going to learn in accident scene management that there's only 2 reasons why you take a helmet off, and one of them has to overlap. So number 1, they have to be wearing a full face helmet. Number 2, they also have to not be breathing. So number 1, they have to have a full face helmet on. So if they have a 3/4 helmet, half helmet, no helmet, obviously, you don't have to take the helmet off. And 2, they have to not be breathing with a full face helmet. So if they're not breathing with a 3/4 helmet, you leave the helmet on and you can still have access to the airway. You're going to learn all that stuff in accident scene management. So if you do not feel comfortable taking a helmet off, don't, especially if you don't have the training. With the mechanism of injury, when it involves a motorcycle accident, there's a really good possibility of a neck injury. And if you're messing around and doing it thinking that you should take it off and they're talking and all this other stuff, then you could quite possibly kill the person or paralyze them. So only do it in an emergency, and that is when they're not breathing, because they'll have permanent brain damage within 8 minutes, but they'll die without having to take the helmet off because they're not breathing. So only if they're not breathing and they're wearing a full face helmet.
No?
So let's go back just real quick. I just want to explain that part right there. He's checking the back of the neck for, they're called spinal processes. You can feel them on the back of your spine. You just check your, girlfriend, husband, whoever, somebody next to you, your coworker, just randomly touch them. That's perfectly fine. Just saying I did that. You could check those little bumps. Those are the spinal processes. If those things are broken off, that means there was trauma to the neck. And that's going to be one of the first indications that there's going to be trauma. So that's what he's doing right there. Then also on top of that, he's going to pad the back of the head, because when you had the helmet, your helmet was keeping your head in line, but now that the helmet's off, you're sitting back like this, and it's going to start pinching things. So he's going to pad it, and you're going to see a little bit later they put something underneath his head to keep his neck in line.
You feeling all right? Well, I was told not to move, but yeah, I wasn't worried about sitting up facing my shoulder. Okay. Nah, I just got that brass up there on my knee, right?
So that right there, how he was touching, that is part of the trauma assessment, more like a rapid trauma assessment. There's a focus assessment, and a focus assessment would be on his arm, because that's something that is complaint, and this is something that is obvious. So that you're going to focus on that arm for a focus assessment, but you still need to do a rapid trauma assessment. Once again, you're going to learn all this in accident scene management. Highly recommend it. So you're going to do a rapid trauma, so you're going to check every single part of the body. The way he did it, he was barely touching the person, and you don't have to expose the person for this, but he was barely touching the person, and you really do have to palpate, especially if they say they have no injuries or no pain down there. You can really push on it, but you want to feel for, and I'm gonna take a step back. I don't want to say you want to feel. I just want to explain this, okay? Because without training, I don't recommend doing this. So while I would do this, I would be pressing a little bit harder, and then I'd be running my hands underneath his legs and then looking at my hands. With his white gloves or even blue nitrile gloves, all these different things, if you look at your hands and there's blood on them, well, guess what? He's bleeding through his clothes. There's an obvious external bleeding going on, and then we need to focus on that. So that's what they're doing there. And then I'm going to go ahead and scroll back just a little bit. When he presses right here, typically what I would do is actually push kind of hard on the pelvis. You want to make sure it's stable, because you have a lot of blood flow going through there. You can have a lot of pain when it comes to that. And I talk about open book fractures. So the front part of your pelvis, it kind of looks like this. And I'll have something coming up on screen. That way it's a little bit easier for me to explain. But you're going to have something like this, and then all of a sudden you're going to have a traumatic separation of the pelvis. And that is called open book. And that's usually happening on a frontal impact of your motorcycle. So if you hit something in front of you, you're going to go up and over or down and under towards that gas tank. You're going to hit your genitalia, you're going to hit your pelvis, you're going to hit your pubic bone, and it's going to cause a separation. And I talked about this many times before, and women actually get it through pregnancy. They get an elastin. It's called elastin. It's a hormone that is produced while you're pregnant, so that when you give birth, they can come out of the vagina and the canal, everything right there. But in order for that to happen, their front of their pelvis has to separate, but that's non-traumatic. That's just with hormones, and the ligaments are separating, so it allows the baby to come through. With a traumatic separation, you can have massive trauma, massive bleeding, massive everything, and it's very deadly. So that's what he should be doing, is pressing a little bit harder to see if there's stability, and that's what I would do. And then he's going to palpate the stomach just real quick right there. And that's only two quadrants. So you have upper left, upper right, bottom left, bottom right. And I don't know if it's switched around for you guys. It's not for me, but you're going to check each quadrant and then feel for a pulsating mass, which is just like internal bleeding. You're going to feel it like pulse. Like when you have an infection on your skin, you can feel it's warm and it's almost like has a heartbeat. That's what you're kind of looking for when it comes to the abdomen. And then depending on the quadrant, you know which, you'll kind of know which organs were hurt. You know, in the upper right, you're going to have your liver. You know, the bottom left and the bottom right, you're going to have large and small intestine and stuff like that, visceral versus parietal pain. A bunch of different things here that is going to be EMS specific. And I just wanted to explain a little bit more about that.
I feel a scrape, but up and down in your ankle? No, sir.
Do you take any blood thinners?
I don't take anything.
No medications of any kind?
No.
No?
Do you take any blood thinners? Do you take any medications of any kind? So her main concern is a blood thinner, and aspirin's a blood thinner. Warfarin's a blood thinner. A bunch of different things for people either with AFib or, you know, with previous strokes or stuff that's trying to prevent a stroke. And with that, I mean, you can bleed out quick. Your platelets aren't working, and you're just going to keep bleeding. So a minor cut to the hand that would typically just clot up with the platelets in your blood, for somebody on a medication with a blood thinner, it's just going to keep going. It's going to be super hard to stop it. And a lot of times you're going to have to get it cauterized at the hospital. So she's concerned about that because you could easily bleed internally and quickly. Same thing with the brain. And then also with the medications, do you take any medications? Typically when somebody says something, like they say, yeah, I take albuterol or I take this and this and this, then it gives you an idea because they're trained to understand what medications go to what. So when you say I take albuterol, they're like, okay, he's got asthma. So with asthma, did asthma cause this? Is he having an asthma attack? So then you start going through this constant, you know, why, how, all these different things. That's probably why I think this way. Probably why I constantly ask why and how is because I have to investigate when it comes to a patient not giving me very much information based on the questioning. So these are all things that that this person is doing in her head and everyone else is trying to do. Typically, the person that's the paramedic has the most information, but there's some really smart EMTs that know above and below their skill level just so they can assist a paramedic or assist a first responder.
Overpark's going to be our local trauma center or St. Joe. Can you take you as well?
So that right there, we have a trauma center. We can also take you to St. Joe. So there, she's given you an option of where you can go. And she's, I know later on she's going to recommend going to a trauma center because that's what they do. And when it comes to a trauma center, they literally have people there that focus on trauma. At a normal ER, they have people there that focus on trauma. They focus on medical. They focus on all these different things. So they know a lot about a lot of things. And then if you go to a trauma center, they know a massive amount, and then they have the resources about this one thing, which is trauma. So it's always best to go to an area that, or a hospital that is going to service you for the injury or ailment that you have. They have stroke centers, heart centers, trauma centers, typical ERs that will stabilize you, then send you to a trauma center. So she's given the option of going straight to the trauma center, which is going to be a good option.
Probably 35, 37, I guess. 35, 37. Serious now. Witnesses,
So that right there, I'm sorry if I interrupted you guys' hearing of the question, but she said approximately how fast are you going? And he's given her the 35, 37. He's corroborating, saying, yeah, that's what we heard from witnesses. Now, that is not going to be, hey, how fast are you going? I want to get you a ticket. Not at all. When EMS personnel are asking these questions, at no point do they care about whether what you did was legal or illegal. I don't care, and that's how I treat my videos, is I don't give a crap if you're doing wheelies and all this other stuff. I care about if you're going to do it safely, but then I also care how you feel afterwards and what happened afterwards. I care about that. I don't care how you did it. I care about what happens afterwards so I can take care of you. And that's what they're thinking. They're thinking, you know, I don't care what you did. You're on the ground right now. I'm taking care of you. I don't care if you can afford it or not. I don't care if you're, you know, mean to me or not. I'm taking care of you. That is the job of a public servant, and that's what what they're doing here. So I just had to get on a soapbox because a lot of people are saying, why am I so nice when it comes to people crashing, doing reckless stuff? Because at the end of the day, I've seen it all. It doesn't matter. I just care if you're okay. So right here, when she asked that question, it's all about mechanism of injury. If you're literally going 70 miles an hour in whatever zone, it doesn't matter, and then you crash, that's going to be a completely different situation than you crashing at 30, 35. Now you're going to have massive injuries. All the injuries are going to be exacerbated. Instead of just a broken collarbone, you're going to have shattered collarbone. See what I mean there? So don't lie to paramedics or EMTs. If they ask you if you've taken any recreational drugs and you know that you've done crazy ass drugs prior to this, smoked meth. There you go. So if you smoked meth before that, and they're on scene, they ask you that question, don't be like, no, I haven't done anything, because they need to know that information so they can give you different medications, or they can change their route of treatment to cancel out the problem. But if you say no, then now we're going down a different rabbit hole, and we're like, why is this person acting this way? Now we got to wait till the drug test and all these other things to finally get information when you're over here, you're suffering. So don't suffer while people are trying to figure these things out. Just be honest and be truthful, and that's going to help us along with our treatment of you. At the end of the day, it's you that are in pain. It's not my emergency. It's not their emergency. If you're suffering pain, we don't like that. But if you're lying to us, that's your own fault. We want to help you, so help us help you. Sorry about that.
Okay. And you think possibly a brief loss of consciousness?
Possibly.
All right.
So possibility of loss of consciousness, we talked about it a little bit over there, and he said possibly. That's going to give her an indication, yes, there was some type of brain injury.
I would recommend a trauma center just to be safe, because that's what they deal with.
Yeah.
You know?
I recommend a trauma center because that's what they deal with. That's exactly right. And then you notice how the words of I recommend. Wording is very important. I try my best to be good with my words, but wording is very important when it comes to this type of stuff, and it allows you to pick it apart. So when she says she recommends, remember, you can't kidnap anybody. These people cannot kidnap you. You can always say no. So when she says I recommend, it's a recommendation. It's not a I'm telling you to do this. So it's good to know.
We can help sit you up and see how you feel.
I will need help if I move anywhere.
Yeah. No, we'll help sit you up. I mean, I would recommend going with you. It's what I do.
With you, sure.
Well, in my
I thought I had to go alone. That's
So that's the whole thing. I recommend you going with me in my ambulance. Walterrific is just funny here. Also, there's the padding underneath his head so the person can remove their hands. That looks like an AED or some type of thing. I don't know, whatever. I'm getting excited.
Sorry about it. All right, let's just over the top out with it.
Yes, sir. What is the full favor? Name again? Crystal? Crystal, if you can hold this.
Sure.
Thank you.
Those arms going to have to go like this. Okay. Hold on, this arm.
You can use this arm to hold them. There.
Grab the wrist.
I don't know what gets me when it comes to people in pain, but man, that sucks. Like you could just see it in his face, the grimacing. Let's get back. It just sucks. He's having to hold his arm. They recommend holding his arm because when you break a bone, like I said, you lose the structural stability. So he's having to support his arm and his weight. And the reason why we have multiple people helping out is because if we just say get up, what's your first instinct to do is to put your arms down to push yourself up. Well, if you do that with a broken bone, it's not going to be any good. And then if you do it with your left arm instead of your right arm, now your right arm is dangling and it's in a lot of pain. So they're helping out.
Unfortunately, you have to take the whole thing off and cut it because it's ripped down the front.
So you notice his demeanor kind of changed, and this is something that we see a lot in patients is that when they're in the least amount of pain, it's a lot of joking, and or it's just like this reaction. Like if something happens, you want to kind of joke about it, kind of minimize it, kind of an embarrassment, kind of all these things, like all this excitement's coming around. Jokes are typically one of the first things to come out. And then once you get into more pain, like when he's sitting up like this, then it becomes more of a serious tone. And as EMS providers, we understand that. And then as the patient, they're just like, oh, this is pissing me off now because of the pain. And that's the whole fight or flight symptom. That's literally going to be your adrenaline pumping. It's like, well, let's try to stop some of this pain because our body doesn't want it. And you're going to kind of see that in his tone right there. He's like, okay, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. That wasn't the concept earlier. It was joking. But now it's like, let's get this shit going.
Yeah, it's new and it's expensive, but there's no way. If it has to come off, you have to cut it. Can you get any support on my arm?
See what I mean? It's like, now, come on, do this. Come on, help me out. And earlier it wasn't like that. And that's going to be the pain-induced emotions. So he's not an angry person. I know that. The way he is on the ground is how he is. So that right there tells me, okay, he's in a lot of pain. I'm not sitting there as an EMS provider or EMT or whatever you want to call me. I'm not sitting there judging him. It's like, oh, now you're going to be an asshole to me. No, it's like, oh, shoot, now he's really in pain. So it's that flip of the brain and flip of the mindset when it comes to being a servant to the public.
Which one is it? We can try to do it. Or is it a whole body thing?
You'd have to slide my arm out of the... You got this one?
The choppy sentences. You're going to have to slip my arm out. That right there is letting me know he's in a lot of pain. Typically when you do full sentences, everything's fine. When you do choppy sentences, it's either because of the pain or because of a mechanical situation with the lungs or the ribs. So I'm also concerned now that he's sitting up that he's doing these short, choppy sentences. I really got to do an intense focus assessment on his chest. I'm going to do a full body assessment again, a full detailed assessment, but I want to do another focused one on his chest just in case.
You'd have to...
We can slide this arm out, right?
It's in the watch off.
Hey, is that where it was? Or did someone drag it up here? What? My bike, is that where it ended up? Yeah. Wow, that's convenient for everybody else.
Try to do as gently as possible. Still painful.
At some point you have to stop whining.
So they're having to cut that portion off because in order to slide that arm out, it's going to cause way too much pain, way too much damage already. So they're just going to cut that portion off. And he's using trauma shears. I see a lot of people just pop out knives and start cutting stuff, especially on downed riders or anybody injured. And that's very dangerous. One slip and now you cause extra damage to the patient, possibly severely injuring them. So trauma shears are kind of blunted on the end, but they're extremely sharp and they have a really good leverage to cut through a lot of materials. I personally have a med kit or a trauma kit on my motorcycle, and trauma shears is part of that.
It's just taking a lot of strength to sit up for some reason.
Taking a lot of strength to sit up for some reason. Your body is literally saying, I'm putting 100% focus on that arm and that pain, that the rest of your body is not going to be functioning as well. It's not going to be 100%. And I see that all the time. I'll see people with what seems like minor injuries and they can't walk. And that's going to give you a good idea of what's going on with the body and the whole system. And it sucks to see that. It really does. I'm glad he's doing better though.
Yeah, let's go on a road trip.
All right.
So that right there, sorry, we're constantly pausing it, but that right there, EMS typically, they'll ask the question, do you want to go? And they're like, I don't know. And then when you're like, okay, well, let's get you up because we can't leave you here. Let's get you up and let's move. Let's see if you can actually do what you need to do to basically be okay. And typically when they get into pain at that point, we'll ask again, okay, you're in a lot of pain. Are you sure? You sure you don't want to come with me? And pain is a great motivator to get a patient to go to the hospital. So if you ever show up on scene, I guess, as a bystander, and you ask the person, hey, are you in a lot of pain? You're like, yeah. And he's like, let's go to the hospital. Like, no. It's like, you're in pain. This isn't normal. Let's get you to the hospital. It's at least call 911, let them talk to you. And that's a good way of doing verbal judo to get a patient or get somebody to at least acknowledge that they're in pain and to get that chain of treatment going.
We'll wait till we get you in the ambulance, okay? All right, so next thing we're going to do, I'm going to help with your arm. Because we're going to help, I want you to take her hand.
Take my hand.
Bend your knees. We're going to help you stand up. He's going to kind of get behind you.
You can kind of use my feet as like a...
All right. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Wonderful.
There's that.
Thank you.
No, I got to take care of
I know you have a different job. We'll get that cut off.
my whip.
So he started to cut it off. He's like, we'll do that in the ambulance. And that's mainly for privacy of the patient. Since this is not a life or death situation right now, they have time to do stuff. So they'll do most of it in the back of the ambulance within privacy. If Walterrific was unconscious and bleeding everywhere, we don't give a crap. We'll just cut everything off and we'll do what we need to do. And we got implied consent at that point, especially if they're unconscious. If you remember what I talked about, you have to give consent to be taken somewhere. If you're completely unconscious, that's called implied consent. It's implied that you would want me to give you care if you were conscious. That's basically that. So that's going to save and help us with liability when it comes to EMS and patients.
Is my bike okay? Well, from what I can see, it's probably at least scraped up. This always looks so much less painful in the movies. How much is that going to cost me?
So this right here, they're going to expose the patient. There's easy ways of doing it, and they're doing a good job. So now it's just going to fold over. And they're going to check the rest of the torso, rest of the body. And they're probably going to do the same thing for his pants. And they might leave his underwear on. But there's definitely ways of doing it. You can cut the sides and then flip the pants over, look, and then flip it back over so the patient is still covered. There's different ways of doing that.
What happened was, always telling you, I was taking this turn here. I was trying to change the song on my phone, so I was looking down, pushing the button, and it wouldn't change. And I was like, skip, and then crash, no curve. I was like, yeah, it's my fault. Oh yeah, that's not a problem for me. It's the pride that sucks.
All right.
The pride. You're going to get an ego hit when something like that happens. And this is why I would really like to have a conversation with Walterrific about how this all felt.
Oh no, drugs.
Oh, so right there, what she was doing is starting an IV. So it's intravenous. So they're going to open up a port basically to give you medications. Then also right here, that blue cable that's going to wrap around and go to his finger, that's going to be called the Pulse Oximetry. It's basically going to let the EMTs and paramedics know how much oxygen concentration you have in your blood. Typically 98% plus is good. Anything below that, you start getting to hypoxic, which is low blood oxygen levels. And that's going to be really messing with your brain. And then also it's going to show the heart rate. It's just going to show in terms of numbers. The best way to get a heart rate is through a heart monitor. And then she has a blood pressure cuff too. And it's all attached to the monitor itself.
So how long until the drugs kick in and what happens? Three transferring coming on.
Do you want the drugs? You said you changed it like a 5.
Sure, let's take drugs. So what could be wrong with the abscess?
Broken, dislocated. You got your collarbone, your shoulder, all that kind of stuff up in there. Let's go over to Gage.
So there's the blood pressure cuff. You see it's all attached to the thing right behind her. And what he has is called a triangular bandage sling. Triangular bandages fold up really tiny, and I have them in my trauma kit just in case something like this happens. Extremity injuries, the upper extremities, very common in a motorcycle accident. You're going to put your hands down, and that force is going to be transmitted throughout your body. Basically, it's going to injure your arm. So the way to keep it nice and comfortable is to put it in a sling. And I keep 2. You got 2 arms.
Going 35 miles an hour approximately down the road, around a curve, went to change the music on your phone, looked away from the road, next thing you know, you end up on the sidewalk.
Basically,
right?
Wasn't that.
So she's got the monitor ready to go. And why does she remember this? She has to memorize this. She has to understand this because she's going to be passing this information to the head nurse or the doctor when he's transferred of care to the hospital. And this is why I say don't lie to the people, because she's going to give this information to the doctor, and now your treatment's going to be based upon that, and then he's going to maybe ask some more questions, maybe corroborate some of it, just in case. You know, it's not necessarily that she's wrong, it's just that he wants to hear it for himself. But this is why you need to not lie, because this information is literally going to be transmitted over the radio to the hospital. Let them know this is what we're coming in with, and you don't want them to show up with you when it sounded like it was minor over the radio and they're not prepared for you. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that they know the full extent, so if it is a major thing, they are prepped for you to be received.
Fast. I looked up and I was like, well, can't correct it.
Uh-huh.
And then I went over and said,
How much do you love that shirt?
what is it? Oh, it's a special shirt. It's my 301 Club.
The 301 Club, if you don't know what 301 Plus is, that back in the day with YouTube, if you had more views, over 300, and it was really quick, it basically just said 301 until they could validate the view count. Nowadays, it's pretty up to date. And then his thumbs up says 1337. That's leet in computer speak. So, Walterrific, you're a giant nerd.
There's only 300 more of these in the world. Wait. I want to be shirtless if you can. Alright, so before I go naked and lose consciousness, I'm going to turn this off and we'll see what happens after all that. But guys, I have enough, what's the word, not pride, to make sure to tell you, don't freaking, music counts too. Music counts too. Just don't look at the phone. You can wait. Could have waited, wish I had waited. But it's my own fault, and I have a problem saying that. So, anyway, that happens sometimes.
So that was very good of him to be able to share that. Thank you so much, Walterrific, and thank you guys for watching this video. Check out the next videos, and I'll be seeing you around. What is up, everybody? DanDanTheFireman here. We're going to be going over Chase on Two Wheels and his low-sided accident. Now, this is going to be a couple years old, but it's very good information to show you guys because it's part of a group ride. It's a low side. He's wearing full gear, and he's able to get up and walk away from it like it was nothing. Now, the bike didn't get to get up and walk away, but